Hey, welcome back. Today we're in Matthew 22 through 24, and we are deep into, jumping right into the final week of Jesus' life. And this is the next big block of teaching that Jesus does. Remember, we talked about Matthew's organization technique where he organizes big block of teaching and then stories about the authority of the kingdom and people's response to the kingdom. Big block of teaching, stories about the authority of the kingdom and Jesus' response to the kingdom, or people's response to the kingdom. And so this is the last big block of teaching. And so he starts off with parables, the parable of the wedding feast. The idea is that if you want to come to the feast, you want to be invited to the big party that is the kingdom. You have to come in the way the king says. You don't get to not come in the way the king. You don't get to pick your own criteria for being part of the kingdom of God. The king picks. And so that's the idea. And then he talks about a different kind of kingdom, and paying the famous line, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, but give to God what is God's. And the amazing thing about that is he held up a coin that had an image of Caesar. And he said, give to Caesar essentially what bears his image, but give to God what bears his image. How do you know it belongs to Caesar? It's got Caesar's picture on it. How do you know you belong to God? You're made in his image. Give yourself to Christ, and give yourself to God. Surrender yourself to God. A powerful, powerful story and illustration. And then there's conflict about the resurrection. The Sadducees were kind of a liberal group that did not believe in miracles or spirits or resurrection or angels and those kinds of things. And Jesus said to them, they tried to trick him with a question they usually used to try to stump people and start arguments, who were biblical literalists, meaning that they literally believed the Bible in its miraculous and supernatural elements. And they tried to use one of those arguments to Jesus, and he said, you just don't know what you're talking about. Jesus was a biblical literalist. He believed that the supernatural was literally true in the Bible. He believed in the resurrection. He believes in angels. He believes in those an afterlife, all of that kind of stuff. And so he thinks the Bible, that God's telling the truth. And so he confronts them about that. And then the great commandment he talks about in chapter 22. And then he talks about there's conflict with the son of David. And then in chapter 23, he jumps into a big conversation. This is where you're going to see some repetition. You're going to see the phrase, woe to you. He starts talking to the crowd publicly in front of the scribes and the Pharisees, who were very strict. He just dealt with the Sadducees, who were not very strict. They were kind of liberal. And then he starts dealing with the highly religious Pharisees and scribes, who were very strict. And he starts pronouncing woes on them. In fact, there's 7 of them in chapter 23. So you'll see that as you go through. And the things that they did with their strictness, but not being kind, not being merciful, not being full of love. And he says, you ought to have done these other things. You should have been careful in your life. You should have been conscientious in your life and your morals and your ethics, but not neglected the weightier, what he calls the weightier, heavier, more important matters of the law, such as justice, mercy, and faithfulness. So it's like, don't do all of these little small things and neglect the giant things. You should do both, is the idea. So sometimes people think, oh, this is Jesus saying we don't have to do a whole bunch of little stuff. We just kind of love people. No, he's saying that you have to be consistent. You have to go all the way, right? You should definitely keep the law and keep God's laws, but you should also do the other things as well. And so they were hypocrites. They were clean only publicly, but underneath were not. And then he laments over Jerusalem. And then in chapter 24, usually it's called the Olivet Discourse, because he's on the Mount of Olives when he gives that. And he talks a lot about the future prophetically. He talks about the way that things will be torn down. In fact, Matthew chapter 24, verse 2, Jesus said, do you see all this temple? There will not be left one stone on top of another that will not be thrown down. And that was literally fulfilled after the crucifixion of Christ, where literally the Roman general Titus in 70 AD, so about 40 years after Christ died, the Roman general Titus, literally the Romans pulled every single stone down off of the temple. Not one stone was left on top of another. And so incredible fulfillment of the prophetic power of Jesus and his direction about how Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, and the end of the age, and talks about being ready when Christ returns, because you do not know when that will happen. All right. And so that's the direction that he gives us there. And there's more to talk about next week or tomorrow on that same topic. See you then.